Hey everyone, today we're going to dive into a really specific and honestly pretty fascinating viewpoint on chakras. We're going to be pulling directly from a source that looks at this whole topic through a very unique spiritual lens. We'll break down its main ideas, its core argument, and where it all leads. So let's just jump right in with a big question that our source material really tackles head on. We often hear about chakras in the world of wellness and energy work, right? But this document, well, it has a very different take. So why the caution? Why the warning? That's exactly what we're here to unpack.
Okay, so before we can really get into the main argument, we need to make sure we're all on the same page with the language. Let's take a look at how our source actually defines chakras and the third eye. So, according to this source, chakras are these 7 specific energy centers inside the body. It points out that practices you might have heard of, like Reiki and pranic healing, are all built around the idea of activating or balancing these points to affect how we feel both emotionally and physically. And then you've got the third eye. This is presented as the very top of the system, the highest chakra. The document says that for people who practice this, the ultimate goal is to open it up to get to a higher level of spiritual awareness, or what the source even calls supernatural perception. All right, so now that we've got the definitions down, let's get to the real heart of the matter. This is where the source lays out its central argument about what it sees as the potential dangers of these practices. And here it is. This is the core claim, plain and simple. From this document's point of view, the act of intentionally opening your chakras isn't just a wellness technique, it's classified as an occult practice. And the most critical piece of that assertion is that these practices, it says, are not from God. This slide really puts the two opposing views side by side. On one hand, you have the stated goal of the practice, right? Gaining spiritual awareness, balancing your energy. But on the other hand, you have the danger that our source is outlining, the very serious risk of opening spiritual doorways for what it calls demonic influence. Let's just pause on this direct quote for a second because it really sums up the whole warning. It says, instead of opening a person to divine grace, they may open spiritual entry points for demonic influence. That phrase really captures the core risk as this source sees it. So, if that's the danger, what's the solution? The document doesn't just identify a problem and leave it there. It actually lays out a very specific plan of action for anyone who's been involved in these practices. Okay, so the source lays out 4 clear steps. The first one is to actively renounce these practices. Step 2 is to use prayer specifically to close any of those spiritual entry points we talked about. Third, it recommends participating in the Sacraments, highlighting confession in particular. And finally, the 4th step is to seek out the formal prayers of the church for help and support. And the source adds a pretty crucial follow-up here. It warns that if these steps aren't taken, what it calls unclean spirits could just keep entering and actually making their influence even stronger. It's framed as this ongoing problem that really needs a final, decisive solution. All right, we have covered a lot of ground. We've looked at the concepts, the main argument, and the recommended steps. So now let's just pull it all together and quickly run through the key teachings from this document. So to really boil it all down, here are the crucial points from this source. First, it views these practices as coming from a non-Christian occult spiritual background. Second, it sees them as an effort to control spiritual energy completely separate from God. Third, doing this can apparently create openings for what it calls demonic oppression. And finally, the path to protection it offers is through Jesus, the Sacraments, and a clear renunciation of it all. That's pretty much the core message in a nutshell. And all of this brings us to one last thought to leave you with. We've just gone deep on one very specific viewpoint, based completely on this one source. But it opens up a much bigger question, doesn't it? How do all the different frameworks out there, religious, spiritual, even secular, make sense of this complicated intersection between our spirituality and our personal well-being? Something to think about.